So we will begin the financial affairs portion of the meetings. But before we get started with roll call, I would like to acknowledge that someone's officially here. I heard Mr. Salty truck out. Still gives me bubbles in my stomach. Butterflies, it's like really exciting. Let's start with roll call, starting with Ms. Loman.
Miss Jennifer Lemon here. Robin Murphy here.
Ross Whiting present.
Leah Mulner present.
Charles Verdell Williams present.
Mia Woodstein present.
Dan Schultz present.
And Pamela Henry present.
Zachary Epps present.
There we go. So we are all present. Can I have a motion to approve last month's minutes? So
Second.
Mr. Riddell Williams, second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. And I will turn it over to Mr. Swagger.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, first on our agenda, we have a special guest to come present the June 30th, 2023 audit results. Mr. Carl Hogan is in the back of the room. And I have a few pages to share from our audit report. So I will turn it over to Mr. Hogan.
All right, I'll keep it brief. I know the audit's supposed to be historical perspective. We don't want to be this historical, but I think we're gonna get, I think Josh is really intent on being less historical with the audit. But the good news is we're here. The financial results, I think everybody's going to be ultimately happy with the financial results and how they ended up, and the kind of flexibility it's going to give you moving forward as a school district. So this is June 30th, 2023. I know this will give you kind of an idea where you stood then in terms of where you were as of 22-23. You're a good portion through the year during for 23-24. What things I've been talking about with Josh is that he's kind of mimicked the financial statements and what he's reporting to you on a monthly basis. So the good news is, when you're going to see these financial statements on an annual basis, they should pretty much mimic what he's been reporting to you on a monthly basis. And there's going to be no surprises or any kind of, even though they may be, as a historical perspective of the year, but they should, at the end of the day, be what was being reported to you on a monthly basis. Just going to touch base on the independent auditors report. I'm not going to touch base on, every part of the independent auditors report, but obviously the most important thing is the opinion paragraph basically stating that the numbers that are being presented in this audit report are fairly presented as of June 30th, 2023. As we come down, similar to last year, there was a new accounting principle that was implemented last year. If you remember, we had GASB 87. Now we're all the way up to GASB 96. Doesn't stop, it seems. There's different GASBs. They're applicable to governments in different ways. But for the current year, the one that was applicable for the school district is GASB statement number 96. Subscription-based information technology arrangements. So similar to leases. On the government-wide financial statements, we're capitalizing software that has a life more than 1 year, then amortizing that over the lease. So basically capitalizing it. But in relation to what you're doing on an annual basis related to your budget, all you want to worry about is what's my annual payment that needs to be made and what kind of tax, what kind of revenues need to be generated to pay for that on an annual basis. And then the rest of the report is basically boilerplate. Responsibilities of management haven't changed. Our responsibilities haven't changed. The only thing I want to point out as we come down a little bit, I just want to point out required supplementary information. So when you do get the full financial statement, that'll be in your packet. I want everybody to focus on some of the big parts of the required supplementary information. Part of it that we're going to go over tonight, like we did last year. The budget to actual schedule. It's kind of shoved in the back of the audit report on page number 52. But it's because we don't audit your budgeted amounts. We only audit your actual amounts. But at the end of the day, probably the most important, you put out a budget at the beginning of the year and you want to see how you did compared to your budget. And that kind of gives you an idea of, what were our revenues, what were our expenditures, and compared to what we did budgeted for those amounts. And the other big piece, a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about tonight has already been highlighted in management's discussion and analysis. Management's put together their little synopsis, so it's only 10 pages long, but it kind of focuses on those items that we just talked about, like the budget to actual, comparing current year revenues or prior year revenues, expenditures, but also gives management the ability, since this is a historical document, to kind of talk about what's going to impact the school district in the future. So in the case based upon talking to, Josh, and, there's a lot of capital items, in the works possibly, like you just spoke about before, and a lot of decisions to be made. And a lot of the things that happen in 22, 23 are going to impact what you're going to be able to do as a school district, capital wise. And then the last page, I think it just talks about the supplementary information in terms of the district. The supplementary information primarily just consists of the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And we just need to make sure that is in relation to the financial statements fairly presented. We'll touch base on that in a couple slides. So just like I just alluded to, here's your budget to actual schedule. And I think what everybody needs to focus on is, I know Josh has gone through this, or Mr. Swigard's already gone over this with everybody, is that, you had a good year in terms of what was budgeted for revenues and budgeted for expenditures and how things came in. But the focus should be on this revenue section up at the top. These are kind of the line items that you don't have that much control over. School districts, we audited a lot of school districts, like 40 school districts, and everybody was kind of in the same boat in terms of having more than unanticipated revenues that, you couldn't have foreseen when you went through the budget process during 22, 23. So the biggest pieces, the local source revenue was and you gotta look at that perspective too. We're looking at pretty big numbers, $100 million. And, your budgeted local source revenues being $4.8 million better than anticipated. If you drill down into that and you look at the biggest piece, and I'm sure you already know, $2.3 million of that is investment income. So when you went through the budget process, who could have foreseen that you have a federal funds rate that stayed at 5% or went to 5% and stayed there for the entire year? And then also within local sources, I think we discussed this last year as well, earned income taxes, transfer taxes. And these are all revenues that you can't say, hey, we're going to get this again next year, because that's when you could, if you're not conservative, it could go the other way and be unanticipated to the negative. State source revenues. We all know the state didn't have their budget passed at the beginning of the year. So typically we see that number being a lot closer than usual. But because of the fact the state didn't have their budget passed and there was increases in your basic and special ed subsidies, that number came in higher than anticipated. I guess there's some additional monies for the upcoming year for the school district. So hopefully we know about those monies. You can budget appropriately. We don't have this type of variance again for the upcoming year. Federal source revenues, this increase amount over budget is all being driven by the ARPA funds. So you didn't know, you went through the budget process and you had an idea what you're going to spend the money on, the timing of those projects and those purchases, but those were accelerated a little bit. So for every dollar that's overspent in the federal source revenues, it's being shown in the expenditures down below. They're kind of match for match. And correct me if I'm wrong, they're in that line item down below, support services central for the information technology. So that's kind of the match. A lot of the match being, one being over budget for the revenues and the expenditures being over budget as well. Just like in any given year in all my school districts, it seems like, we're looking at this at the function level, and this is what we're giving our opinion on. There's some ups and there's some downs in different areas, and I think you've already reviewed these. But ultimately, when you look at your expenditures and total expenditures being, less than anticipated by $1.7 million, I know there were some of the line items that kind of stick out. Student transportation services being better than anticipated. I think those were items that were being, under budgeted in previous years, and you had a negative amount there. So amounts were added and they came in less than anticipated. Also within regular programs, there were some staffing amounts that were under budget. And then also with the student activities, I think management also talked to you about that as the year went along, and why those line items were less than budget. But ultimately, it all worked out in the end, $1.6 million less than budget. So as a result of your revenues being better than anticipated mostly, plus your expenditures, you had an $8.6 million better than anticipated revenues over expenditures for the current year. So as a result, as we come down below in our other financing sources uses, the board approved a additional $5 million or $6 million to go over into the capital projects fund as you kind of gear up for your capital improvements that you're looking at. And, you know, it's a great, just due to the timing, that's great for the school district. So ultimately your fund balance is going to increase by $2.1 million from 24.5 to 26.6. And we'll kind of go over the details of the fund balance and what makes up the 26 and what that actually consists of, and, you know, what's allowed by the state to be unassigned and the rest to be, you know, committed. And we'll kind of go over that. So this is the physical amount, the $6 million that's going over to the capital reserve fund. And that's for, you know, I guess projects that are currently planned to be expended from that fund. So the next page is the balance sheet, governmental funds. This is basically what the $26 million is made up. So you have your assets. Your assets are primarily made up of cash and investments. Most of your investments are pretty liquid and could be you know, converted to cash pretty quickly after year end. So 36 million or the $47.8 million is available as of June 30th, 2023. Due from other governments is your big other line item here, and this is just basically a timing issue. PDE reimburses you for expenses that have been paid. Some of the big line items there is PSERS. They reimburse you 50% on a quarterly basis. So there's a corresponding liability down below for paying the fourth quarter PSERS payment. Also, there were some additional federal awards receivables there related to your ARPA. So that amount is a little bit, you know, larger in the past 2 years, just related to the ESSER loan that was receivable for expenditures paid. But ultimately, when you look at this, everything's pretty liquid and comes in shortly after year end. And then we look at your liabilities down below. So you can see your accounts payable. This is all invoices that come in shortly after year end to be paid. So they kind of trickle in, you know, over almost 6 months. You know, basically, you know, there might be tuition. People aren't timely in terms of that. Due to other funds, this is the amount that's due over to the capital reserve fund. I think there was a piece from last year, some expenses that were paid on behalf of you know, the general fund. But the big piece of that $9.8 million, that's $6 million, and actually just physically moving the cash over to the capital reserve fund. And then there's accrued salaries, payroll withholdings, and benefits. And once again, this is just the timing of any kind of accrued salaries you had at year end that need to be paid out at year end. Plus the biggest piece is the quarterly PSERS payment that's paid in September of every year. As we come down, fund balances, here's the excess of the assets over the liabilities, and there's your fund balance. So as you can see, you have items that are considered by definition non-spendable, inventories and prepaid items, amounts that are restricted for capital projects, which is in your capital reserve fund, the $22.2 million. But then also you have a signed amount for capital projects within the general fund. So these are amounts that are signed, but I don't think have been dedicated to a capital project at this point in time. So what happens is if you move that money over to the capital projects under the capital reserve fund, it can't come back. So there's a program, the annual financial report that management files. So if they move that money over, it won't allow you to physically move that money back in accordance with state law. So in the time being, it's kind of like a placeholder for right now till you identify what those projects are going to be. And as you identify those projects, you can move them over to the capital reserve fund when you know what they're going to be. So in the meantime, you keep the money here, and if you need it for something else, you could unassign it or uncommit it and use it within the general fund. And then the $2 million that was assigned last year for the strategic academic planning. And then you have the unassigned fund balance, which is, you know, the equivalent of 8% of your next year's expenditure budget as allowed by PDE. So if you think about it, it makes sense because of the fact that you've had one-time revenue windfalls being used for one-time capital expenditures that you don't want to use for recurring, you know, operations as you kind of build your budgets on an annual basis. And the next page, I think this is just, I'm on to this one first before I put in the wrong order, but basically it's kind of outlined. We had a capital projects fund during the current year. There wasn't much activity going on during the current year in the capital projects fund. I had to kind of ramp up and build up those funds for projects that are going to happen in 23, 24, 24, 25. Next slide. So the next slide is we also audit other funds. One thing I didn't include in here is the student activities fund. We kind of look at everything There's also the food service fund and the internal service fund. The internal service fund, for all intents and purposes, reflects the activity in CPAS, your healthcare and consortium. Unfortunately, in the internal service fund this year, it happens, I've seen it happen in other districts. Your claimant's experience wasn't that great this year, so there are some monies that need to be made up, through future contributions over to CPAS, and we're going to see down here at the bottom that the fund actually had a deficit of about $1 million. Makes sense that you had a bad year related to claims wise, and then also your rates went up to CPAS. What CPAS is going to do is they're going to change your rates on an annual basis to get the proper reserves within that fund. So if this ever happens again, then you'll have the funds there to be able to, for any kind of unanticipated claim. So I think CPAS is about 3 months they will need to have in that fund. So they'll change your billings. And Josh has indicated to me today that, the claims are looking a lot better this year. So we should be able to get rid of that, that deficit position within the internal service fund. And then also the food service fund, once again, all the school districts, just because of the additional monies they received through COVID and also through the supply chain assistance. Also, there were some other, operating subsidies that were provided to food service during COVID has, put this position in a positive position as of June 30th, 2023. The next slide. Here is, so as you can see, even in 2023, I think the claims, you can see over there at the internal service fund, you had an increase of, $700,000 in amounts that were being billed over to CPAS. Food service revenues went up. They only make sense because the COVID era, free subsidies had ended, and now you were able to have operating revenues. And as you come down, it makes more sense too, as things ramped back up in 22, 23. Because if you remember, there was a period of time during 22 or 21, 22 that you were still operating kind of like hybrid operations. So it only makes sense that not only do the operating revenues increase, your operating expenses increase, and then if you look down below, you're going to see kind of things even out for increased operations, but at the same time, monies were being funneled in or being paid through those operating revenues up at the top. Good news here, no transfers in needed to be offset any kind of loss. So if you remember in previous years, if you look at your food service, the general fund had to make contributions to the food service fund. So just the last couple of 3 years, it's great that, I haven't seen any school districts having to make, contributions to the food service fund. But you can see 2 years in a row over in that CPAS activity, we had a $500,000 loss and a $1 million loss. But, that's the great thing about the consortium. The other entities pick you up, and then vice versa. You have a good year and they have a bad year. So it's kind of how it works out, and you kind of all share in the administrator at the end of the day. So if you were self-insured by yourself, you'd have to pay for all that stuff for yourself up front, and there's no kind of shared resources to be able to pay for those. Let's come down. So this is this is just a summary of the audit findings. We kind of talked about the unmodified report. I know the business office went through some transition this year. I know they want to make improvements to things, that there are things that need to be improved. And I know the business office wants to work on that. And I know they're transparent in terms of, things that want to be improved, et cetera. But I did not think, anything rose to the level. It's got changed here. There's no, that should be saying no. That was related to the previous year. I just noticed that now. But there was nothing that rose to the level. There is improvements that need to be made in terms of some of the reporting and some of the cleanup from previous years. But looking at those changes that were made this year, and you're looking at a budget of almost $130 million, they're not significant or material weaknesses or prevent you from being able to do your job as a board. And I know management wants to do the right thing to get it as clean as possible. As it come down, just to kind of point out, so this year we had to audit 2 programs just because of the fact that you're still not a low risk auditee because there was some material weakness or significant deficiencies in previous years. So you have to go a couple years without any findings to get rid of that. And then we had to also to get us to, so we have to audit 40%. So in order to get the 40%, we had to audit the special education cluster. So on any annual basis, once this ESSER funding falls off, we'll pretty much be auditing special education cluster and the child nutrition cluster on an annual basis. We kind of talked too about the education stabilization fund. We seem to be auditing that, the ESSER funding at every school. The funny thing is, Deloitte comes in here too, and I know they kind of, needle things a lot too, related things, but it's interesting, the things that they're looking at, the stuff we're looking at on the compliance supplement don't always match up. So, the business office was telling me that you were getting, for procurement and stuff like that, but in the compliance supplement we have, the procurement's not part of the compliance requirements. So just make, so from our perspective and their perspective, I think those funds are getting looked at a lot of angles. So, but at the end of the day, the parts of the compliance requirements we're looking at for allowable costs, et cetera, are all allowable, no costs, spent on educational materials mostly. So, and that's all I have. But overall, I just think when you look at that general fund and the challenges, the financial challenges the district's going to face, this money's not going to always be there. It's a good position to be in. So not everybody has that. And if the state comes through, that'll even make your job easier. That seems nice.
Thank you.
Any questions from the board?
Yep, just one general question, just about number 7 in terms of testing major programs. You shared that basically on an annual basis, that particular cluster, a special education cluster, is what you guys are looking. Is there a reasoning or rationale why that?
So if you look over here, it says the threshold for using the type A and type B programs was $750,000. We will only look at a type B program, which is under $750,000. If we consider it high risk, when you're looking at, the funny thing is we spend so much time on your federal awards and it's such a small part of your budget, which is crazy. So your type B programs, you're probably, if you're ever going to look at one, and maybe it'd be Title I, maybe because you get about $600,000-$700,000. But the 750 awards, IDA is like an $800,000 range, and you get about $1.5 to $2 million. So it's a big part of our audit for such a small portion of. There's separate filings that we have to do with a single audit. So it's, unless we identify something in a type B program for $500,000-$600,000, has to be pretty serious for us to have to consider high risk.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Epps, any questions?
Thanks for checking. I'm good for now. Thanks.
All right, and there, we don't have any community attendees, so we'll raise hands.
I'll just say thank you though, because I know this is a lot of work for administration. I know this is a lot of work on your part and your firm's part. And the detail of this presentation was really great. I appreciate it. I feel like I really understand the report as a result.
Yeah, and like I said, I think you guys have a baseline before you come into this, in terms of what's being reported. So it makes it that much easier. So no surprises.
So, Mr. Schultz, what's the most profound part of the report that president?
Okay.
Honestly, the budget to actual section all great, but most audit reports you're doing it right. So 50 pages and 3 cheers, we're doing it right. But the budget actual, we're doing it right, but it's also really helpful as we're going over the next several months. I think that's going to be a nice page to reference occasionally. We might ask follow-up questions in the budgeting process next month, thanks to the audit.
We could just kind of look at, just normal challenges any kind of school district has, and you can't really control a lot of the expenditures, but some of the things we even just talked about, the hard things to control are, sometimes those healthcare costs or special ed. It's just constant communication, not with management and the special ed department to say, hey, we need to, there's, because next thing you know, an invoice is showing up and you're like, it didn't expect it. So I think that's just, getting the whole team together on the same page that, hey.
I'd be remiss, and it's so easy to take individuals for granted. Mr. Swart down there sitting next to Madam Chair is a major part of why we are and continue to be where we are. I know that we are trying to get through another budget cycle right now. But his attention to detail and his work ethic and just his knowledge, we're in good shape. Just wanted to acknowledge you, Mrs.
I appreciate it. We have a great team. We have a good design.
And just to point out too, I mean, you know, most people, not to remiss anybody, but most people in his position couldn't, you know, he had to pick up the audit and do it himself. So, you know what I mean? So, and people, the typical school district, there's a business manager who's in charge and kind of oversees them. There's an assistant that kind of does the accounting and kind of oversees the business office because of the circumstances. I mean, he was responding to us, getting us all the information in addition to getting stuff nuts. But I mean, most business managers in position don't have his background to be able to make the journal entries and stuff, so we got lucky there.
I have one question.
Yeah.
It might not be for you. It's more of a process question in terms of next steps. So do we vote to approve or receive, or there's no approval of this, right? We simply receive it. And then do we vote on that $6 million transfer?
So the board gave the business manager express authority to make those decisions about the fund balance, but my preference would be if the board approves it and blesses the business transfer.
Sounds good.
And I think it'll be fairly shortly here. I'll have the full document, you know, like I said, focus on, but a lot of the stuff we talked about here tonight, I kind of looked at from Josh's presentation, management discussion.
So the fund balance classifications are just my recommendation. What they should.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome to stay around for the rest of the meeting. All right, so we're probably all sick of staring at balance sheets and income statements, so I'll keep this very quick and very brief. Again, we're looking at a strong cash position year over year, looking at year-to-date operations from April 30th to April 30th. Moving right along and down to our revenues and expenditures. You can see our revenues are right in line with prior years. And you can see our expenditures have grown approximately $4 million year over year. So let's see what is the cause of that. When we look at ESSER spending, April 30th, 2024 to April 30th, 2023, we have spent approximately $1 million more in ESSER. So part of this $4 million increase in expenditures is purely ESSER related and is temporary. And part of that appears in the literacy coaches that were paid for this year, and part of that appears in technology. And you may ask yourself, why is federal revenue less if federal spending is up? Well, we record these interim financial statements on a cash basis, and we don't record receivables, but we have a pretty large receivable balance due from the federal government. So when we get to the end of the year and we record the balances, that will be made up. So our budget is $3.5 million federal revenues. I think we'll be well within that range by the end of the year. Another piece to highlight, we have $300,000 in spending in special ed that's related to access money, and access money is received, which is a federal funding source grant that we hadn't spent in prior years. And we have $320,000 spent in pupil services, and those are on mental health counselors funded through the Pennsylvania Commission of Crime and Delinquency. I think I got that right, PCCD, mental health grants that we did not spend last year. So roughly $2 million, this $4 million related to grant spending, and the rest of this increase has to do with genuine increased costs. So we have a higher than anticipated level of paraprofessional salaries. And I think that's due more to the fact that we were actually able to hire and get a full complement of staff with paraprofessionals this year, as opposed to any other reason. We were just able to maintain all of our paraprofessional positions for the entire year versus losing. I think we were up and down 20 paraprofessionals last year. So we've been able to maintain those positions throughout the year. Also in the special ed cost, we had additional students placed in approved private schools, and that tuition increase was approximately $600,000. So of that 1.7, approximately 800,000 is paras and benefits, 300,000 is the excess spending, and 600,000 is tuitions to approved private schools for special ed placements. And we can't always control students that enroll in our district with needs that the district is not able to educate them or not able to handle. So this is just a year we have an increased number of those students that we're unable to educate and need to be placed outside of the district. The 700,000 we talked about, the additional million in ESSER, that's for the literacy coaching. Additional ESSER related curriculum purchases came out of this line item here. And the last update, we've talked about this ad nauseum, that's the 10% increase in our transportation contract. What we didn't get to go over in Mr. Hogan's report was we were vastly under budget in transportation last year. The transportation charges from the intermediary unit that the IU passes on to the district when it comes to its early intervention program were not captured last year and ended up being billed this year by function of the way PDE handles transportation reimbursement. So that number is going to be a lot larger this year. So we had a significant under budgeting last year, and it's going to be over budget this year. It's kind of a seesaw. So you'll see that before the end of the year, a large increase in expense. All right, so putting this graph together, hopefully we are, I can't hope for that. Hopefully we still have a nice gap. Looking at our largest local revenues, earnings on investments continues to be our largest driver, with almost a full year of a 5% plus rate on our investment earnings, which even after the last Fed meeting doesn't appear it's going to go away anytime soon. We did finally see our first tick in drop in investments. I think it was 3 basis points or 0.03, a very tiny number. So I think that's some indication the market is expecting a drop within the next year. But I think we should still see a strong investment performance this year and even into next year, as we have a lot of our investments intentionally laddered to capture as much as possible. And because we have a nice strong cash position, we're able to to put together CDs and investments that go out into the future and capture these good rates and try to anticipate that fall going forward. Now, and the other thing to highlight, earned income taxes continues to be a very strong number, historically high given the past 5 years. All right, any questions on the interim financial statements?
Mr. Schultz?
The real estate taxes, the year-over-year difference at this point is 0.4%. There was a tax increase of 1.1%. I'm curious, is that a timing artifact, or are we anticipating a lower percentage than 1.1?
There are a couple of factors that go into this number. There's the tax increase, there's interim collections. So any new piece of property that's built, we have interim collections that come into the district impacted. But the biggest impact in this particular year is, if you recall, the Elkins Estate is at the property down the street. That property has a tax abatement as incentive for the development of that site, and all of those payments came due this year of approximately $300,000. So they paid the real estate tax in prior years, and per the agreement, we were to pay it back and then have a graduated phasing in taxes. So this was the year we paid $300,000 back to Elkins Estate. So if you add that in, it's more like a $700,000 increase in yearly expense.
Thank you.
Oh, any other questions? Sorry.
No questions and no questions.
I have my hand raised if nobody else.
sorry.
Oh, no, it's all good. related to the transportation costs, I feel like in my first year there was I think like a over budgeting because something related to routes usage, and then the next year it was like a under budgeting for a different reason, and then we're hearing sort of like the volatility from year to year. So is it? I've been on the board 3 years, right? I've been tracking school budgets for a little longer than that, but transportation specifically, is that typically volatile, or are we experiencing something that is unusual in the last 3 to 4 years? I know we've had a contract increase and all that stuff, but I guess, I don't know, is that making sense, my question at all?
Yes, your question makes perfect sense. The COVID kind of really put a wrench in transportation where you had years where transportation wasn't provided. So you had a significant decrease and you're seeing significant increases. And the IU transportation piece is somewhat unique in that the way the IU transportation reimbursement works is they incur expense, they submit it at the state level, and then the next year the state pulls from all the ascending school districts that transportation costs, and the IU is made whole. When COVID hit, the IU submitted its expense to the state, but at that point nobody was incurring transportation, so the state did not pay out all of the money that was due to the IU to fund its transportation department, and then the IU ended up running a massive deficit for several years until this year when they decided to finally make up that deficit. So, last year we anticipated $1.2 million in MCIU reimbursement to make them whole. It ended up only being $400,000. This year it's going to end up being $1.8 million, and we didn't quite budget $1.8 million. So there is still some volatility on the IU side.
Oh, that's interesting. And so that seems like that's to a certain extent baked into the process. There's going to be a certain level of volatility. It seems like then just that we have to expect year to year.
The IU transportation can be somewhat hard to predict because they're identifying early intervention students with IEPs before they enter kindergarten and providing services and transportation to them. And we can't always accommodate the transportation for those students.
Thanks. Another example of your fantastic attention to detail. So thanks for the comprehensive response.
Okay.
All right, so moving on to the feasibility study update. As you recall, we sent out a survey in response to the facility feasibility study presentations that were done over the past 3 months. So I did my best to summarize the results of that survey. There were a lot of writing comments. I think we had approximately 800 writing comments. So I tried to summarize those responses in a high-level summary to cover the grasp of the feeling and based on topic. And I also wanted to present some of the basic findings from the questions that are more straightforward. So question number 2 on the survey, question number 1 was, are you a resident? And question number 2, have you reviewed the facility planning materials that were posted on the district website? And 70% of the respondents had. Question number 4 was, what factors do you believe contribute most to the quality of public education in schools? So I wanted to point out that teacher quality, staff quality, interacting with students was number 1. Parental involvement was number 2. And then down, closer to the bottom was facilities, how much the district invests in its facilities. Question number 5, following the recommendations of the study, how do you feel about building an addition onto Cedar Brook Middle School to incorporate 6th grade and establish the 6th to 8th grade model? So 70% of respondents voted yes. Approximately 16% were unsure and 14% would rather another option. So even though this response seems overwhelming based on those who took the survey, it did have the most volatility of all of these straightforward questions. Question number 6, closing Elkins Park will result in moving 5th grade into elementary schools. Do you agree with the direction of making a K-5 elementary school model? So we had almost 86% respond yes. 14% responded no. Question number 7 was around providing air conditioning at the high school. And do you agree with the recommendation? And that was, of course, an overwhelming 95% yes.
Except for those 44 diehards. Exactly. Exactly.
So question number 8 was what specific improvements are most urgently needed in Cheltenham School District? Question 9 was just a write-in comment section. So combining those two responses, we had 884 individuals write in comments. I put them in general categories that I thought were relevant, trying to group them to summarize all these respondents in information that could be useful in decision making. And on the next page, you can see I took each one of these categories, broke it out, read through all the comments twice, and tried to come up with what the gist of the response was. So under those who responded about general building maintenance, most of the comments were on the overall conditions of the buildings, the need for updates, air conditioning, concerns of Elkins Park and the condition of that building. And respondents wanted to ensure that educational spaces are adequate for learning. 1% responded directly about Cedarbrook and their concerns regarding the size of the site and its ability to have more activities. 18% responded specifically about the high school, concerns regarding the age of the building, primarily focused on adding air conditioning, improving bathroom spaces, and increased safety within the building, and overall improvement of all athletic facilities. And I kind of put those in order of priority. So it was overwhelmingly air conditioning, followed by improving bathroom spaces, and increased safety. 6% responded regarding elementary schools and concerns over making what a K-5 model might mean for class sizes and crowded classrooms, bringing 5th grade back in elementary schools. And there was a slightly split review on a K-5 versus a K-1 model, with a slight favorability on K-5 schools overall. 24% responded directly about Elkins Park. Concerns over the poor condition of the building and favoring its immediate replacement in whatever form. Most of the time it was unspecified. It was just please eliminate Elkins Park. And mixed responses on rebuilding Elkins Park at its current site or relocating students to other buildings. The facilities comments were generally about the overall conditions of the building. Comments on poor conditions and investing in better preventative maintenance to beautify schools, particularly the fronts of schools and the first immediate vestibules and areas within schools, and working with the township to develop facilities for all residents. 3% of respondents replied about the stadium and how concerns regarding the priority of the stadium project over other classroom related projects. And 17%, although taxes was not a highlight of the survey, replied that taxes were unsustainable and they were not wanting tax increases and or making financial decisions with taxes in mind, and commented on the highest tax rates in the county. And I had a final category, which was general category, which were comments that were not directly related to the facility plan. They were sometimes critical and or supportive of past and current decisions of the district, but not really helpful in terms of moving this study forward. So any questions on the survey?
Any question from Ms. Wilder? I just was there a specific question about the K-1 model, or was that?
There were three presented pathways forward. Pathway 1, which is to straight rebuild of Elkins Park. Pathway 2 was targeted additions to make a K-5 model at 6 to 8. And pathway 3 was pre-K or K-1 center, elementary schools, and 6 to 8 middle school.
And that was
not necessarily the preferred route.
So there was a lot of mixed responses about whether K-5 or pre-K 6 to 8 model would be best for the district. The K-5 model kind of came out ahead, but that was probably the most volatility.
Mr. Schultz?
Following up on that, maybe more concretely, do we have I'd be very curious what the actual number breakdown of between those are. Was it 60% wanted K-5, 40% were interested in K-1, or was it a wider spread than that? And was the format, because I did not take the survey since I'm a board member, but I guess I could have. Was it presented as which of the, sorry, yeah, good, I should have been. Was it, I just wanted to preface my ignorance here, I'm just being honest, I didn't think it. Was it picked between the three options, or was it a yes, no type of question?
So those comments were primarily in the elementary section. And they were people commenting about which pathway they would.
I see.
So you kind of had those comments scattered throughout the whole survey.
Got it.
And they were concentrated within.
So it wasn't like there was, question 8 was which of these paths would you prefer? It was ad hoc.
Question 8 was just what specific improvements do you feel are most, so a wide open question. Do you feel like most urgently?
Thank you.
Leah.
Thanks, Josh. For Mr. Sharp, I appreciate all the work that went into
Yeah.
this. 880 seems like a decent response rate. I guess I'm curious it's hard to parse out exactly what a percentage it is because I don't know what that group includes. And I did take the survey, whether I'm supposed to or not, I don't know. And I cannot remember if it collected demographic information, okay, so we don't know guardians, parents, teachers, students. It was pushed out to all of the above, any email address, essentially. Okay.
And it was shared on social media, so anybody.
So community members could have taken it. Okay, I was just curious. 880 still seems pretty solid to me. But it's hard to know. We don't really have a total of what it could be.
So question 1 was surrounded residency, so.
Okay.
And not that was the truth, but
Okay.
question was to weed out non-residents. Sorry, Charles. I think that's how it works.
Sure. One thing struck me, I was expecting closer percentages for the K through 5 elementary and moving K through 5 to the elementary school and 6th grade to the middle school. It seems that there's very strong support for both of those classes in general. Also, that's just a general comment, but my question is, if I'm looking at the feasibility study Q2, have you reviewed the facilities planning materials? I would also think about breaking out the data versus based on who has reviewed it. It's not percentages. And that could give you an idea about how well we have communicated the plan. So the kinds of things that people are gleaning from the plan in general. It'll give us a good idea about how people are interpreting it, whether they've heard it in a different venue or if it's communication from the system. And so I don't know if you had considered breaking out that or it's just a suggestion.
We certainly can. I just require over time.
Of course, yes. Yes, I understand. Especially for large data like this.
Mr. Williams?
Yep. So one of the topics that I know came up, I'm not sure if it was general building maintenance, but it was in regards to high school, just improvement of overall improvement of all athletic facilities. I was looking back at the presentation that we received from KCBA, what we discussed previously about the stadium project is like really how we have kind of had, that's been the title that we've been discussing the most, but just thinking about that, and maybe the answer doesn't have to come right now, but is the inclusion of all athletic facilities a part of that? and just the greatest, most significant and visible part of that, the football stadium.
So I can answer that. So it will need to be addressed in phases. So in this initial phase is the immediate stadium, which we feel will still impact the majority of sports outside of baseball. Baseball then is part of that second phase that we would have to address. So even though practices, some games, just like Miss Mulhern stated when she came in here, like senior night was on the main field, right? That's how we envision that soccer, lacrosse, whatever, will have opportunities to still play on that main field, even though we'll have to use secondary spaces as well. It's going to take us a couple phases to touch athletics in its entirety, but it definitely needs to happen. We know that like a big piece for the baseball is just the dugouts, for instance. We are already looking at how to try to address the situations with the grass. So that's not something that we have to necessarily do through this plan in terms of enhancements. So multiple pieces are definitely under consideration.
Yeah, and I appreciate that context. Also, just like from a community perspective, right? I think the board members, we have some more information in that. I think having shared that publicly helps, because if you look back at the presentation only, you'll see the Austin football stadium, and then if your child plays on your softball team, your perspective is going to feel extremely inequitable. Is a way to be viewed. So I think that the context behind that is actually important, and it may have, may drive, some of the interest in the overall improvement. I think folks just want to know.
And I think that's something that we could have KCBA do preliminarily, is what would that design actually look like in terms of those future projects? And then we would have to look at attaching the top.
Okay, great. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Coming from a district in a similar situation where all of the other sports facilities, paled in comparison to the stadium. I mean, the stadium was gym class, it was community lunch, it was graduation. It was touched by a lot of students more than all the other athletic facilities, which is why it was prioritized. And here in this situation, as part of the capital plan, seems to be a priority no matter what pathway is chosen, and is one of the lower cost items. Which I know that was a concern, the survey, why it was prioritized. That was essentially to get things in the pipeline moving, rather than continue to sit on our hands for an extra year and do that.
Sure. Appreciate the context. Thank you.
Any other board questions? Mr. Schultz?
I will play my now recurring role, which is next steps. What are the next steps in this process? You have the survey results. We've been presented the options, probably reaching a point where we're going to need to make a decision. What does that process look like?
It's going to be us coming forth with recommendations to you as a board, with getting approval of what we feel the best priority based on feedback would and should look like. So really want to kind of try to get moving, especially on the instructional side. So I'll be debriefing with the team. I am on a little slight hiatus, but I wanted to be here tonight. But once I'm back full force, we'll put together what will ultimately be presented to you guys.
It would come in the form of a completed feasibility study with the recommendation and timeline pathway.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Just
Mr. Burdell, will you-
recognizing Mr. Epps.
Oh, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I just unmuted as well. Looking forward to being back in person once I get off these crutches, or at least a little more healed. So yeah, I also appreciate the conversation. I guess it's a little related to next steps. Uh, it's pretty clear, right? Closing EP, sort of moving forward with that option. There's a lot of comfort with that. And at first, I was thinking through, we sort of have some options where we could do nothing with it for a certain amount of time, right? While there's still some things figured out. But it seems like if we are going to go the route of building a K-1 center, we have to commit to that at some point now, even if we don't have a specific date to do it. We have to commit to doing it because then it actually impacts the construction projects at Glenside, the size of the construction projects. Am I understanding that correctly? I see Mr. Swigert nodding his head, but could you just affirm or correct me where I'm off?
So if you're talking about a K1 center, then
Yeah, at where EP is now. Yeah.
then I think you're asking the questions, do you even need it in addition to Glenside? Is there a temporary place to put students that, perhaps in mods while a K1 center is built and developed and built? So those are the questions that have to be answered immediately.
Yeah, but I thought I heard that building it in the near term was not even an option. Or did I hear that incorrectly?
So the construction period for any sort of project, you're probably looking at 12 months of design and then 18 to 24 months of construction, depending on how the supply chains and labor force works itself out in the next couple of years. So you have quite a while until that all gets done. But making that first step, committing to that design and directing your architects where to go is the first piece of action.
Even from a financials perspective, that was like the $113 million option, right?
Yes, I believe that was, yep.
Yeah, and so I thought even from a financial perspective, that wasn't really feasible, but it sounds like it is. If or am I jumping too far? If I'm jumping, because I'm at least like to the point about the decisions that we're going to make. I guess this is where I'm kind of focusing in. The decisions that we're going to make now, like how much do we have to commit to an option, even if we're not going to do it within the next 15 years or so?
So there was a very critical question that was asked around next steps. And that was us submitting recommendations for your consideration. I would feel like you're leading me a certain direction as one board member based on your comments. We are going to put recommendations together. I would ask that you hold until we're able to do our due diligence, because outside of that, I would be shooting from the hip right now. Just being very transparent with you at this point in time. When you look at the feedback, we have to make a determination of what model we want to go with ultimately. That dialogue won't come out until we make recommendations to you guys. If a recommendation is made to look at going our early learning center, which ultimately would really be pre-K and K, I wouldn't even want to include first grade in that. But again, if that's the desire and will of the board, that would be something that we could also look at. But if we went in looking just pulling kindergarten out, then that allows us to have 1 through 5. It would really change the elementary model to a 1 through 5 with us having an early learning center. Where there was a lot of energy based on feedback was sticking with the traditional K through 5 model, because there are concerns around commute time and this and that of kindergarten, this and that. But there is a lot of energy also around programmatically us taking a look at, which we wouldn't be able to do, Mrs. Swigert, correct me, until I think 3 years down the road, in terms of just looking at the pre-K option as a standalone even. There's a lot of parental energy around wanting to have pre-K. So there's several scenarios which I don't want to fly by the hip in trying to give you or any of the board information that I just can't quantify at this point in time. We wanted to give you the high level feedback. Now we will go back, take a deeper dive, and come up with some solid recommendations working with KCBA for your consideration. And then at that time is when I would really welcome any and all dialogue from the board with what this potentially could look like attached to the finances. And we have to be cognizant of that because even at, and I'm going off the top of my head, we want to really try to stay around $76 million at this point in time, to be quite honest. We were able to go higher than that, but that's maxing us out. So those are the types of pieces that we will align options to finance. So we figure out what this could look like as we phase it in. So, and I don't like rambling. And I
Yeah, no, that's certainly helpful. No, all of that is helpful. Certainly, I was trying to get some clarity, not lead you to a certain direction. So, from what if I could reflect back just to make sure I'm on the same page, I was trying to get some clarity on options, and it sounds like we're still sort of at that stage of thinking through options. And some of what we've heard already are just that. We've got some feedbacks on some options, but we're still at a point of thinking through options. And so that's, and so that's helpful. Yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that.
That's where we're currently at in the process, is really identifying what all of our options are, getting feedback from the community around those options. And now as an administration, we need to disaggregate, unpack all of that, and now put that in a package to you as a board in the form of recommendations based on those options. Okay.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
A helpful piece of information might be the pre-K grant offered by the state follows the student, not the facility. So that's why the MCIU is able to run its programs through our facilities, primarily serving our students, but not 100%. And we also have other pre-K counts programs running within the district that serve our students and students outside the district and daycare facilities.
Any other questions from the board? Seeing none in the community?
All right, last slide, I promise. It's getting late.
Fine.
A couple items for board approval consideration next week. We have 3 large technology purchases, all purchased through federal bid contract through the Central Susquehanna Intermediary Unit. We have 1,250 Chromebooks plus licensing cases and warranty at a total cost of $453,000. We also have a contract for smart panel replacement at Wincote and Cheltenham Elementary. The smart panels at the front of each of the classrooms, total cost of $394,000. Both of those projects are funded through ESSER and, as I said, are procured through federal contract. Now, the final item is replacement of our storage area network servers, district-wide at a total cost of $155,000. And that is a non-ESSER purchase, but a required purchase through the technology department. So those are the 3 large items. The final item is a furniture purchase for Elkins Park, and that is to replace all of the student and teacher desk chairs in classrooms to eliminate the outdated old learning desks and to replace them with movable, reconfigurable spaces so that to give more flexibility for students in learning. And of course, whatever decision is made with EP, this furniture follows those students to wherever they go. So given the status of EP and the outdated nature of the building, it was a suggestion of curriculum, a good suggestion to why not expedite this purchase, push this through, why not create those learning environments funds now, rather than waiting several years down the road. So purchased through PA state contract, the Department of General Services. Total cost of that contract would be $559,000 for 41 classroom sets. And the furniture would primarily match buildings that have already been rented. So the learning experience would be similar from elementary.
Right.
EP back to Super.
You have more questions?
Yes.
Thank you. The Chromebooks, are those Chromebooks for incoming students? Are they replacement Chromebooks? What's the goal with those?
So with 4,200 students and Chromebooks lasting from 4 to 5 years, we're constantly cycling them out. Unfortunately, people keep squeezing us on their license and their servicing. It used to be a 5-year window. It's kind of getting squeezed to its functionality on a 4-year side. So, with 4,200 students, we're replacing 1,000 every 4 years. And with the funding available, it assists in stocking it now.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question on timing with the furniture. When is it anticipated that the new desk will be available for students?
So the reason for the quick turnaround on this,
Mhm.
when the idea was presented, was to try and get this in place before school starts. So from talking with the vendor, and the vendor is Corbett, by the way. Corbett was the entity who we received a Flux Space grant through, the $700,000 Flux Space grant through their company. So they've been a valued partner to the district. For meeting with them, in order for this to happen, it would have to be expedited and approved.
Any other questions from board members? Zachary, any questions?
We're good.
Okay. That's the last slide.
That was the last slide.
Seeing that there are no community members, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.